Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The violence that has to date left an estimated 280 people dead and 1,830 injured has been overwhelmingly perpetrated by the state and by pro-government armed elements. And those killed also include at least 19 police officers.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says the death toll from anti-government protests in Nicaragua is approaching 300. Both opposition groups and pro-government forces are accused of violence, including kidnappings and killings. We'll host a debate with Julio Martinez-Ellsberg, advisor to one of the main student movements opposing the Nicaraguan government, and Camilo Mejia, the well-known Nicaraguan-American Iraq war resistor and son of the famed Sandinista singer Carlos Mejia Godoy, who was active in the struggle to overthrow the Somoza dictatorship in the 70s, but no longer supports the Sandinista government. Camilo Mejia, his son, wrote an open letter to Amnesty International condemning the organization for its role in Nicaragua. He supports the Sandinista government today. Then former President Obama marks the centennial of Mandela's birth with a speech full of thinly veiled criticism of President Trump.
We see the utter loss of shame among political leaders where they're caught in a lie and they just double down and they lie some more.
We'll get response from Mandela's close friend, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and talk to him about the protests in Chicago over the police killing of yet another African-American man. Then this week marks 4 years since Eric Garner was killed when a white New York City police officer wrestled him to the ground and applied a fatal chokehold while Garner said, "I can't breathe," 11 times. The officer continues to work for the New York Police Department, and Garner's mother is demanding justice.
All those officers that day, they need to stand accountable for what they did to my son. They killed him. He was unarmed.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Under a barrage of bipartisan criticism, President Trump said Tuesday he misspoke in the news conference in Helsinki after a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This was Trump's original statement about alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
That was Trump speaking Monday in Helsinki alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin. But Tuesday, after news anchors, lawmakers, and members of the intelligence community decried his comments as treasonous, Trump said he'd misspoken, mistakenly saying would when he meant to say wouldn't.
Just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. And the sentence should have been, and I thought it would be maybe a little bit unclear on the transcript or unclear on the actual video. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative. So you can put that in, and I think that probably clarifies things pretty good by itself.
In rare public comments, former President Barack Obama issued a thinly veiled criticism of President Trump, denouncing the rise of strongman politics while Obama was speaking in Johannesburg, South Africa, at an event marking the centennial of Nelson Mandela's birth.
I am not being alarmist. I am simply stating the facts. Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it, but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning.
That was former U.S. President Barack Obama speaking at the centennial commemoration of the birth of Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for 27 years in apartheid South Africa before being released and becoming South Africa's first black president. He would have turned 100 years old today. We'll have more on Mandela's life later in the broadcast with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. In more news on Trump's comments about Russia, a New York Times photographer took a photo photo of his prepared remarks, showing a Sharpie was used to cross out the phrase, anyone involved in that meddling to justice, in reference to prosecuting those involved in the alleged interference in the U.S. elections. The prepared remarks also showed the words, "There was no collusion," scrawled in Sharpie in the margins of the paper. After delivering his statement yesterday, Trump launched a tweet storm attempting to defend his comments in Helsinki, tweeting last night, "The meeting between President Putin and myself was a great success, except in the fake news media," unquote. Trump also tweeted this morning, "So many people at the higher ends of intelligence love my press conference performance in Helsinki. Putin and I discussed many important subjects at our earlier meeting. We got along well, which truly bothered many haters who wanted to see a boxing match. Big results will come," unquote. On Capitol Hill, Senate committees are holding hearings today and tomorrow on President Trump's proposal to reorganize the federal government. Trump's plan includes merging the Labor Department with the Education Department, privatizing the U.S. Postal Service, and radically transforming the Interior Department. In response to Trump's proposal, the American Federation of Government Employees says, quote, "There's little reason to believe this reorganization plan is anything more than a scheme to eliminate essential programs and public service jobs, reward or punish political appointees, and privatize government programs to reward political donors," AFME said. The European Union and Japan signed one of the world's largest free trade agreements during a meeting of leaders in Tokyo Tuesday. The trade deal will cover a quarter of the global economy. It comes as the Trump administration has imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum from the European Union, threatened to incite a trade war with China, and pulled out of sweeping trade deals like the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership. In East Africa, the first direct flights between Ethiopia and Eritrea in 20 years have taken off from Addis Ababa, headed to Eritrea's capital Asmara this morning. Al Jazeera reports the majority of the flight's passengers were members of families separated by the long-running state of war between the neighboring countries. The resumed flights come as part of a historic peace effort to end the 20-year conflict. In Spain, a 3-day strike by Amazon workers continues despite repression by Spanish police, who attacked striking workers Tuesday and arrested at least 2 people. The attack in Spain came as thousands of Amazon workers in Germany and Poland also went on strike. This is Spanish union leader Douglas Harper speaking about the international strike action.
The local management, which is handling the negotiations here, have told us that management at headquarters in the United States have placed a glass ceiling which they cannot break. So we hope that with these mobilizations, the glass ceiling expands and comes closer to what we are demanding.
And activists and educators have successfully raised enough money to erect a monument to honor famed journalist, abolitionist, and suffragist Ida B. Wells. The fundraising effort was first launched over a decade ago by Ida B. Wells' great-granddaughter, Michelle Duster. The $300,000 monument will be designed and built by celebrated African-American sculptor Richard Hunt and installed near Ida B. Wells' former home in Bronzeville, Chicago. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today's show in Nicaragua, where the Associated Press reports that 3 people were killed and dozens were wounded when pro-government forces regained control of the Monimbo neighborhood of Masaya Tuesday. The Organization of American States says the death toll from mounting anti-government protests has risen to at least 273 people. Demonstrations to oust Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega began in mid-April when his government announced plans to overhaul Social Security. Both opposition groups and pro-government forces have been accused of violence, including kidnappings and killings. The Nicaraguan government says the official death toll is 51 and accuses opposition protesters of using violence to overthrow the elected leftist government. On Sunday, Nicaragua's national police accused the opposition of kidnapping, torturing, and incinerating a police officer.
On Monday, hundreds marched in the streets of Managua to demand justice for students killed Friday during an hours-long standoff at the National Autonomous University of Nicaragua between pro-government forces and opposition protesters who'd seized control of the university campus. Tuesday, UN spokesperson Farhan Haq condemned the violence on behalf of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
It is absolutely essential to end the violence in Nicaragua immediately and revitalize the national dialogue there for a political solution. He noted the recent human rights report on Nicaragua and affirmed the government's responsibility to protect its citizens, a principle that should not be forgotten at a time when we unfortunately have a death toll that is absolutely shocking.
Daniel Ortega has served as president of Nicaragua since 2007. In the late 70s, as a leader of the Sandinista National Liberation Front, he helped overthrow the U.S.-backed Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza. Ortega then led Nicaragua from 1979 to 1990 before being elected again in 2007, then again in 2016 for his third consecutive term with more than 72% of the vote. But the current crisis has pitted Ortega against some of his former Sandinista allies. Thursday marks the 39th anniversary of Liberation Day, which commemorates the overthrow of the Somoza regime in 1979 by the Sandinistas. Today, for more, we're hosting a debate here in New York City. We're joined by Julio Martinez-Ellsberg, an advisor to the University Coalition for Democracy and Justice, or CUDJ, one of the main student movements opposing the Nicaraguan government of Daniel Ortega. He's also part of the Platform for Social Movements, a group of diverse Nicaraguan civil society organizations which organized after the crisis began. And in Pittsburgh, we're joined by Camilo Mejia, the well-known Nicaraguan-American Iraq War resistor. He was the first GI who served in Iraq to have publicly resisted the war and was imprisoned for refusing to go back for almost a year. Camilo Mejia is the former chair of Iraq Veterans Against the War and an active member of Veterans for Peace. He's also the son of the famed Sandinista singer-songwriter Carlos Mejia Godoy, who no longer supports the Ortega government and has released a pro-opposition album titled Heroes of April. Camilo Mejia is the author of an open letter to Amnesty International condemning the organization for its role in Nicaragua. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! We're going to begin with Camilo Mejia. Talk about what you believe is happening in Nicaragua today.
Good morning, Amy. Thank you for having me on the show again. Good morning, Julio. What is happening again, Amy, it's pretty easy to see if you take a couple of steps back and look at the history between the United States and Nicaragua, where you have a number of instances in which the United States government, along with the Central Intelligence Agency and some so-called pro-democracy groups like the National Endowment for Democracy, the National Democratic Institute, and the U.S. Agency for International Development, have funded and directed not only media organizations but so-called civil society groups and human rights groups to basically undermine the Sandinista government. And then before that, of course, to support the U.S.-supported dictatorship of Somoza. What we're seeing right now is a two-faced movement, one that is the clean face represented by students and civil society organizations that, as I mentioned, are supported by the United States, and a very violent group of people who have been manning these tranques, or roadblocks, that have basically kept entire cities besieged and kept them in a state of terror to basically undermine support for the Sandinista government, and also to keep them from speaking out and to also hurt the economy. What is happening right now in Nicaragua is nothing short of a bloody, Gene Sharp-style soft coup, with the entire support of the United States, the civil society organizations that are operating in Nicaragua, the movement, the Sandinista Renovation Movement, or MRS, as well as the international corporate media, the same international corporate media that has also worked with the United States to create a mirage of weapons of mass destruction and mushroom clouds, for instance, in Iraq, that led to a very bloody invasion and occupation that killed over 1 million Iraqi citizens, and then turned out to be based on false claims. Something very similar is happening in Nicaragua. The war drums are beating. They have the entire support of Western media and human rights organizations to create this image to basically undermine support for the Sandinista revolution, not only nationally but internationally. The coup is failing. The tranques have been removed. The people are out celebrating. But the international media is not reporting it that way because they're aiming to more strongly and more directly intervene in our affairs. Like I said,
Camilo, let me bring in
history.
Camilo, if you can, let me bring in Julio Martinez-Ellsberg, your perspective, and you're obviously a very different viewpoint on what's going on today in Nicaragua.
Yes, thank you for having me. Okay, so Daniel Ortega betrayed the Sandinista revolution many years ago. Okay, and this has been an alert that the Nicaraguan progressives have been giving for many years. Everyone that you know from the 1980s, anyone that's famous, has already turned against him because they can see that he is not a progressive, is not left-wing, and right now he's gone full-on dictator the same way that Somoza was. The same people that fought against him during the 1970s, against Somoza in the 1970s and 80s, are now in the social movements fighting against Ortega. He does not represent anything that's progressive, and the murder that he's done in pure daylight using paramilitary troops and the police has everyone furious, and really there's just really no question on the ground as to who is responsible for the deaths. This debate, these talking points about the CIA and the United States being behind this is something that he's using with his former allies from the 1980s, people that are on our side, progressives in Europe, progressives in the US, who think that it might be plausible. However, this is the reason that from the very beginning we've asked for human rights organizations, for as many people to be on the ground and see it for themselves, so it's not just me or Camilo having some sort of debate where everyone can see it for themselves and it's unanimous. Every single human rights group that's attended has seen with their own eyes that during daylight these people are shooting protesters for the sole reason of exercising the right to protest and for speaking freely against the government. He is a dictator. And he is a murderer. There's no doubt about this.
When you say he's a dictator and a murderer, and people have been raising these issues for a while, he was elected just in 2016 with 72% of the vote in the country. So is it something that's rapidly happened in the last year and a half? Or if it was happening earlier, why did so many people vote for him?
Okay. For the past 10 years, he has completely undone the democracy in Nicaragua. Okay? He's taken over every single power. The electorate, the judicial system, the parliament, everything is completely consolidated. He has been threatening people from the opposition for the past 10 years. That's why so many progressives left him behind. There has been election rigging starting in 2008 that only received slaps on the wrist from the international community, and his absolute power was brought together with the Nicaraguan capitalists, with the Nicaraguan right wing. From the very beginning, he made a deal with them where he wouldn't ask for them for any taxes, and in exchange, the people that have traditionally had power in Nicaragua would not say anything about his power grabs, leaving a very tiny civil society to march. And every single march during the past 10 years has been met by paramilitary troops. This has been a reality for the past 10 years. This is not something new. The only thing that's new is the level of brutality, the level of murder that we've seen in the past 3 months. When these elections have been happening in the past few years, there's no opposition anymore. Anyone that speaks out has been completely neutralized. If you had a job that has any links to the government, you're fired. If you speak out and you are from a local community, then you have no right to any kind of social programs. He's completely neutralized the opposition with the help of the Nicaraguan private sector, who, well into the protests, were still with him about a month in. They turned back on him about 5 weeks after the protest started, saying that he'd gone too far and now thinking that he wasn't a safe bet anymore. They thought that he was going to be toppled, so they were looking to leave. But he's depended on them fully for the past 10 years. The fact that he didn't request taxes from them, the only reason that he was able to have social programs or anything of the sort is with Venezuelan oil money that he funneled through private companies. He did not do it through the normal public sector. He did not use parliament. He has absolutely no oversight over $5 billion of Venezuelan cooperation. We have absolutely no registry of what he's been doing with it. Only leaked documents that show that 2/3 of it were actually used by for-profit companies, which are now used to provide the money for the repression.
Camilo Mejia, your response.
Thank you, Amy. Well, I would think Julio is right. You shouldn't listen to him or myself. Just listen to what representatives of USAID and NED have been saying to the U.S. Congress, telling them, bragging basically about laying the foundations for insurrection in Nicaragua, bragging about doing the work that in the past was done by the CIA. All you need to do is look at the support that this movement has in the likes of Representative Ileana Ros-Lehtinen and Senators Rubio and Cruz. These are some of the most conservative politicians in the United States. The Trump administration, the U.S. representative at the Organization of American States, and the oligarchy that Julio speaks about is 100% behind this opposition. In fact, they are the ones who originally called for the protest. So it's all right there. You don't have to listen to us. I have sent you some articles about who is behind a lot of these organizations, like I mentioned before. So don't listen to us. Just look at the document that's there available for everyone. In terms of this being a progressive government, I think that 74% of people who voted for Ortega in 2016, that can give you a pretty clear idea of who the people are behind. And if you look at the programs that we have, Nicaragua, just before April 18, was one of the safest countries in Latin America. It had one of the fastest growing economies. It was not dependent on the United States. In fact, it was completely clear from loans and from debts to the United States and to the IMF. And 70% of the jobs in Nicaragua are created through the popular market economy, which means that we're not dependent on transnational money or big capital. That's one of the big reasons why this is happening right now. Another big reason is that we signed a treaty with China to build a canal, which has been basically at the heart of rivalry between Nicaragua and the United States since the mid-1900s, when the United States basically set its sights on Nicaragua because of the canal. And then once the canal was built in Panama, it kept an interest in Nicaragua to prevent Nicaragua from building a canal that would stand in opposition and competition to the U.S. canal in Panama. So it's really hard to see where Julio is coming from when you have 74% of the electorate in Nicaragua voting for Ortega, and you have all these social uplift programs and this safety and this economic growth that is even recognized by the IMF and the World Bank. The Nicaraguan people are not unsatisfied with the Ortega administration. They are very happy with the Ortega administration, and I think the elections are a testament to that. And I think that what's happening with Mr. Julio's friends and his political opposition in Nicaragua is that they're hungry for power, and they don't have a popular base. The last time that they ran on an election in 2006, they have approximately 1.3% of the vote. And they, ever since what they have done, rather than building a progressive people's agenda or a progressive platform upon which to become popular and gain more support from the Nicaraguan people, what they have done is that they have allied themselves with the right. They have run elections alongside some of the more oligarchic, right-wing, conservative parties in Nicaragua, and they have slowly gravitated towards the nonprofit world, which is what we're seeing right now in the form of these so-called civil society organizations leading the charge against Ortega, leading the charge against a government that offers universal health care to all of its people, including medication, including treatment for chronic disease, a government that has free education at the primary, secondary, and university level, a government that has supported over 4,000 cooperatives led by indigenous peasant women, that has supported over 300,000 small businesses and 100,000 self-employed families that have lifted up the economy and have created food sovereignty, which is a pretty radical concept these days. These are the wins that the Nicaraguan people support,
Camilo,
and this is why
Camilo,
the people support the government.
If I can ask you about some of the stuff that Julio raised, because obviously since Ortega he's in his third term, this issue of his consolidating power to the point, or what he is claiming, that Ortega has consolidated power to the point where the elections really are not that meaningful in terms of an expression of democracy. If you could talk to that point in particular, and also about the issue of all of the people who've been killed. Who is doing the killing? Whether it's 60 or 80 or 200 or 300, that's a significant number of people who have died in the past few months in Nicaragua.
Sure. Thank you, Juan. To the election question, I think that every government has issues. I'm not going to say that the Sandinista government is perfect. They have made alliances, it's true, with the business sector. They've made alliances with the church. They've made alliances with big national money. They did that because in order to govern, you have to make alliances. The Sandinista government runs on a platform of consensus and reconciliation. The model, the economic model that they have created includes building consensus not only with the employers, but also with the employees, so big business sector and the syndicates or the labor unions. This model has been so successful that it's now being adopted by the rest of Central American countries. So this is something that the Sandinistas had to do out of necessity to be able to govern. In terms of, like all these other constitutional or electoral issues, I'm not going to say that the Sandinista government is perfect. They have made mistakes, like any government makes mistakes. But, to put things in perspective, in the time that I have lived in the United States, we have elected 2 presidents without the popular vote. That hasn't happened since the Sandinistas have been running as a political party. They've always won with a majority of the popular vote. We also don't have primary elections with superdelegates overriding the popular vote to decide who is going to run for the party. We also don't have an electoral college that, again, overrides the will of the majority of the people. So, yes, we do have some issues, but nowhere near the level that would throw people into the streets to kill one another. In terms of the deaths, it's really hard to come up with a definitive number of how many people have been killed, because a lot of the deaths that have been claimed by the opposition are people who we know from media reports have been basically taken out of media reports, who have died for various reasons, including suicide, including armed robbery. People have died of heart attacks. Some of them are repeated. Their names are repeated. And there's an entire report on this. So it's really difficult to say who has been killed and how and by whom.
I want to turn to the mother of one of the students who's been killed during nonviolent protests in Nicaragua, Moroni Lopez, killed by police in Managua in April. He was linking arms with other demonstrators to form a human chain when he was shot and killed by the police. A series of videos captured the final moments of his life. He joined the protests after watching video of police hurting elderly protesters, his mother said. I interviewed his mother, Alba Garcia, to respond to government claims that they're not using live ammunition.
Yo le preguntaría a Daniel.
I would ask Daniel then, how is it that my son is dead? How is it that the sons of other moms are dead? How did those 2 bullets come through his chest? How did those 3 shots enter the bodies of the other 2 kids? Because there were 3 shots that were right on target. 2 in the chest and 1 in the neck, 1 in the head. They're not going to do that with handmade mortars. That's false. How is it that more kids are dying? And how is it that the people who disappear return dead with signs of being tortured, without eyes, without teeth, with their bones broken? Who's doing that then? I would like Nicaragua, the country that is crying, to explain to me why this is happening. Explain to me, how is it possible then that my son left alive and now he's dead.
That's Alba Garcia, the mother of Moroni Lopez, killed in April in Nicaragua. Julio Ellsberg, your response to Camilo saying it is not clear who is doing the killing when you're coming up to this number of 300. You have the government saying 50, around 50, and you have the United Nations saying around 300 people have been killed.
Okay. I'll try to respond to the points that Camilo mentioned. One, who's on our side? It's one, the student movement, two, the peasant movement, three, Monimbo. All of these are traditional Sandinista bastions. These people have always been on the side against dictatorship. They were on the side against dictatorship in the 70s, and they're on that side now. The idea that right now the government is touting, celebrating that they've killed that many people in Monimbo is absolutely outrageous. These are all people that consider themselves Sandinista. They're simply not with Ortega. Who else supports us? I mean, you keep on talking about Marco Rubio. How about Pepe Mujica? He spoke out against Ortega yesterday, asked him to step down. Podemos in Spain, the Socialist Party of Spain, the Socialist Party in Chile, the Latin American and Spanish-speaking left are already 100% sure about who's doing the killing, and they say it without mincing words. There is no doubt about who's doing the killings. No, they're not talking about, let's make the violence stop. They're talking about the government is using paramilitary troops to kill its own people, and they're saying clearly that it's the government that needs to stop. We can keep on asking for more and more eyewitnesses to come from the outside as much as we want. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is already on the ground. The Inter-American Commission for Human Rights is on the ground. Every other human rights commission that's on the ground sees the exact same thing. We have a brutal government that's killing its own people for protesting. There is no doubt. These government talking points about there being some sort of fogginess and nobody really knows where the bullets are coming from is absolutely absurd and is based on absolutely no reality. Camilo, you haven't lived there and you don't live there now. We see this every day because they do it in broad daylight. We see it by camera phones, and when you in your article say no, those camera phones maybe they're fixing the videos. We see it from every angle. Everybody there is filming every single step. We've been seeing this since April 18th. There is no doubt on anybody's mind. You can keep on sending as many international observers as you want. They will keep on saying the same thing. The international community is completely behind the protesters. And the protesters are completely against Ortega, and they know there is no minister in charge of the police. Ortega changed the Constitution so that the police respond directly to him, the same way that Somoza did. So every single thing that the police and paramilitary troops do, whether it's at midnight or whether they do it during the day, is completely ordered from the presidential house. Everybody knows this. Let's see. Did I miss any talking points here?
Julio, you're talking about the question of the violence, but the government is claiming that there have been 10 policemen killed. Are you saying that they killed their own policemen, or are you saying is the entire movement peaceful, or sections of the movement already involved in violence against the government? There have been charges of taking over police stations. Can you talk about that as well?
Okay. The movement itself has been nonviolent from the beginning. You can see this from the very beginning, from April 18th on. About 2 weeks in, when the violence didn't stop, the peasant movement took over these roadblocks. They set up about 150 roadblocks because they've been against the government for the past 5 years, with all other progressive movements in Nicaragua. They took over the roadblocks, and people in Managua and every other major city set up barricades in their own neighborhoods. The government has been attacking them head on using high caliber weapons, AK-47s, every single high caliber weapon that you can think of. When they go into neighborhoods, some people are armed in their houses. Okay, so can we guarantee that not a single person in the entire country that's against them doesn't have a gun? I can't guarantee that. But the police are going into their houses. And we have everything on tape because they do it in broad daylight. So some people may have been doing it. The movement is nonviolent, and we've been promoting this. And we've had the largest marches in Nicaraguan history. We had the first one that was largest in Nicaraguan history 5 days after this started on May 30th. That was even larger than the first one. Nicaraguan civil society is 100% behind this protest. As are Sandinistas. If you talk, and we want to talk about other people that are behind us, anyone that you can think of right now, whether it's Sergio Ramirez, Ernesto Cardenal, Joconda Belli, Luis Carrion, Dora Maria Tellez, Mónica Baltodano, all of these leaders that any American progressive will remember from the 1980s is on this side.
Well, Camilo Mejia, I mean, actually, we have a very interesting debate here just between the two of you. Camilo, your parents, well-known Sandinistas, your father, the Sandinista poet, musician, artist, Camilo Mejia Godoy. You take different positions on this. He just came to the United States. He's put out a CD to celebrate the opposition, to support the opposition. And interestingly, Julio Martinez Ellsberg, you are the grandson of Daniel Ellsberg. Yes. Daniel Ellsberg, who worked with the U.S. government, with the Pentagon, and ended up becoming the most famous whistleblower in America around the Vietnam War, releasing the Pentagon Papers. Camilo Mejia, respond to what Julio is saying about the killings, the overwhelming number of killings that he believes there's no question that Ortega has masterminded these killings, and also the conversations you have with your father, leading Sandinista, who now is a leading opponent of Ortega, the man that he supported for so long.
Amy, let me start by saying that every death is regrettable. My heart goes out to that mother, and every time somebody gets killed in Nicaragua, it's a loss for the whole Nicaraguan people. What Julio is saying is highly inaccurate. Even the Amnesty International report, which, as I have said, is highly partialized, recognizes that on the first day of the big march on April 19th, only 3 people were killed, and one of them was a police officer. All of them died by gunshot wounds. So that right there tells you that from the very beginning, the police have encountered a very violent, armed opposition. This has continued throughout the entire conflict. Police officers don't go into the neighborhoods where they have these tranques to meet a peaceful resistance. What they have met with is highly armed people. A lot of them have been imported from El Salvador and Honduras. There are police reports with photographic and video evidence of who these people are. A lot of the people who are from Nicaragua who are these tranques or roadblocks are people who have criminal records. They have found weapons caches at universities. They have found weapons caches at churches. And to the point that Julio is making about having video evidence, I have seen all the evidence. I watch opposition channels all the time, and I look at the evidence, and it's very out of context. And when you look at police officers fighting in one direction, you never see what's on the other side. You never see what they're hiding from, what they're taking cover from, because they don't want you to see the whole picture. What we have evidence of is police officers being killed and burned publicly. We have seen Sandinista compañeros basically being killed and burned and mocked publicly. These images keep coming out, and they're undeniable. The level of brutality that we have seen coming from the opposition has never been seen in Nicaragua. And if you look at the way that these gangs operate in the rest of Central America, where they have been working basically as part of the organized crimes with the drug cartels, you see that some of the same tactics are now playing out in Nicaragua.
Julio Martinez Ellsberg, if you can respond to this, to what Camilo was saying, people at blockades are brought in from other countries involved in drug cartels.
No, no. Simply, that's absurd. Camilo, I highly doubt that you've seen all of the evidence. It's thousands of hours of footage. The attacks are every single day, and the videos that people are taking from their phones are every single day. So you couldn't possibly have seen it all. You know who has seen it all? The teams of about 30 people, the Inter-American Commission came in to review all of the evidence, interview people, go to the ground, go to the roadblocks. And try to provide an eyewitness account that was neutral and that the rest of the international community could see. After having done their extensive investigation, and they found without a shred of a doubt that this was the Nicaraguan government shooting its unarmed population. And as for the same thing has been seen over and over by every other group that goes there in a neutral way. As I said, again, you're not there. How do you know? I don't know when the last time that you were there, or you've never lived there, as far as I know. Exactly how you became an authority on this topic is just beyond. I have no idea how this happened. But these are strictly Nicaraguan government talking points, and with this normal authoritarian intent of trying to say that no one knows what the truth is and there's no one you can trust except the government, which is absolutely absurd. And let's talk about the 3 people that were killed on the first day, because I think that's important. One of them was a 15-year-old named Álvaro Conrado. Okay, this kid left high school to go take water to his friends that were already in college. High school students have been mobilizing because they want to help the other young people. Remember that the people that were leading this towards the beginning were 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. Álvaro Conrado was handing out water to these people without any kind of weapons in his hand when he was shot in the neck. Okay? These are the kind of images that galvanize the Nicaraguan population. About 3 weeks later, Darielis Velázquez and Matias Velázquez, ages 6 months and a year and a half, their house was burned down by police and paramilitary troops early morning, seen by every single person in their block. And when people try to save them, they were shot at by the paramilitary troops and police. This is the reason that we have a protest right now. There has to be justice. We're furious about what's going on.
We have to leave it there, but of course we'll continue to follow what's happening in Nicaragua. Julio Martinez-Ellsberg, I want to thank you for being with us, as well as Camilo Mejia, speaking to us from Pittsburgh. Camilo Mejia, well known for having resisted the Iraq War and was imprisoned as a result of that. And Julio Martinez-Ellsberg, advisor to student groups in one of the main student groups, CUDJ, in Nicaragua, opposing the Nicaraguan government, also part of the Platform for Social Movements, a group of Nicaraguan civil society groups which organized after the crisis began. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, well, if President Nelson Mandela were alive, he would be 100 today. We'll speak with his friend, Reverend Jesse Jackson. Then we'll talk about Eric Garner. This week marks 4 years after he was killed in a stranglehold by New York police. What has happened to that police officer? Stay with us.
Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Zambia. Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe.
Nelson Mandela, Bayusu Ndour, here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, today marks the 100th birthday of Nelson Mandela, perhaps the world's most famous former political prisoner. He was in prison 27 years in South Africa before his release in 1990. He was elected the country's first black president 4 years later. On Tuesday, former President Barack Obama spoke in Johannesburg at an event marking the centennial and used his first major address since stepping down as president to issue thinly veiled criticism of President Trump.
We see the utter loss of shame among political leaders where they're caught in a lie and they just double down and they lie some more. You have to believe in facts. Without facts, there's no basis for cooperation. If I say this is a podium and you say this is an elephant, it's going to be hard for us to cooperate.
That's President Obama speaking at a mass stadium packed with South Africans. For more, we're joined by someone who is very close to Nelson Mandela, Reverend Jesse Jackson, civil rights leader, founder and president of Rainbow Push. Reverend Jackson, I want to go back to 1984 when you gave your presidential campaign speech at the Democratic National Convention speaking out against apartheid in South Africa.
At its worst, our nation will have partnership with South Africa. That's a moral disgrace. It's a moral disgrace. It's a moral disgrace.
That's Reverend Jackson in 1984, joining us now from Chicago. Reverend Jackson, welcome back to Democracy Now! Talk about the significance of this day, the centennial of Nelson Mandela's birth, and the significance of President Obama being there and talking about strong men, a veiled reference clearly to President Trump.
The low point was the U.S. kinship with South Africa as its military and economic partner. And the movement arose here to fight that relationship between the U.S. and South Africa. I think the good news is Mandela represents a kind of a breath of fresh air going through South Africa and across the continent of Africa. He represented a vision of a multiracial, non-democratic, non-racist democratic state. And he rejected strongman government. He could have been elected until he died. He chose to try to build a democracy, a political democracy, and lay the groundwork for an economic one. And so he has gained his stature in the world of great leaders.
And Reverend Jackson, South Africa today, obviously the ANC has, after Mandela, has had major problems in terms of dealing with corruption within its ranks. How do you see the state of the South African people today?
It has gained its political freedom and its economic justice. You have 90% of the population is black African, and yet the 10% control basically all the land and the resources. And so now they are free but not equal. And that's the next stage of the development. They do not control really universities, no agriculture, no banks, no media. If you envision a black island, a black ocean with a white island, 10%. Most of the investment goes into the 10%, but the 9%. I think Mercedes-Benz maybe has a car plant there. They have like 75 dealerships, all white. None of them are black, and so I think the next phase of it, they're better off than they were. Let's say that real fast. But now that they've gained political freedom, they need economic justice, and that will happen. But I think that the shackles of apartheid and its ugliness has been broken.
What do you think Nelson Mandela would be saying about President Trump today? I was wondering if you could comment both on the summit, if you think it should have happened, and President Obama, not often heard on these issues, basically talking about authoritarianism.
Well, President Mandela was very clear on his as a Nobel Prize winner to speak to world issues on a current basis. Clearly, Mr. Trump has an affinity with Mr. Putin that's inexplicable. In his attack on the leader of Canada and Mexico and the EU and NATO, he only finds a kinship with Russia. Attacked the women leaders of Germany and Britain, but not the male leaders standing side by side with Russia. We deserve explanations that we do not have. Among other things, his tax return. What ties are there to Russia? We just do not know. And it's created a very ugly climate in the country of distrust and racial polarization. And I hope that we were able to survive and make a statement in November that will regain our move toward positive relations.
And Reverend Jackson, the little time we have left, you're off to Korea this weekend. Could you talk about that?
We even though we had this meltdown in Helsinki the other day, we must keep encouraging the North-South dialogue in Korea. We must hope that the DMZ will become a peace zone one day. We must keep discouraging the military buildup in the peninsula again, and fight for family reunification. We must not go backwards. I think that Mr. Trump, when he met with the North Korean leader, it was a blow in the right direction. We must not let it go back, because there's a certain cynical notion that says, don't trust them. Well, you need trust and verification. But I do think that we must encourage the North-South reunification in Korea.
You're speaking to us from Chicago. This week is the 5th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. 5 years ago, George Zimmerman acquitted for the killing of Trayvon Martin. And then just this past week, the police killing in Chicago of Harith Augustus, a well-known and very popular barber, father of two. Your comments today?
Well, it seems there's a kind of open season on shooting blacks. Two things need to happen. One, when people are unarmed or killed, it should be a federal crime. Two, we must make lynching a federal crime. By the way, it is not. We must make lynching a federal crime, and shooting unarmed people must be a federal crime. There's too much of it. It's Ferguson, it's Trayvon Martin, it's Diallo in New York. And the idea of using blacks as objects of anger and venom is just too pervasive. And we certainly feel the impact of it, and I just hope it will not explode in ways that distracts us from the agenda of fairness for all.
Well, Reverend Jackson, I want to thank you for being with us. We're going to break for 30 seconds. When we come back, we'll talk about Eric Garner. Eric Garner, who was killed 4 years ago this week in a New York police chokehold as he gasped, "I can't breathe," 11 times.
I can't breathe. No, it ain't your hands choking me. It's history out of hand with police. Situation's critical. You agree, yeah. Hey, you'd agree. They kill children in the park, murder youth unarmed. They stand on the corner, claiming space that's ours. Hey, they kill children in the park, murder youth unarmed.
Garner poem by Mourning a Black Star. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, this Tuesday marks 4 years since Eric Garner, an African-American father of 6, was killed when a white New York City police officer wrestled him to the ground, pinned him down, and applied a fatal chokehold while Garner said, "I can't breathe," 11 times. The incident was captured on a cell phone video, and his killing spurred mass protests. This week, the NYPD announced plans to move forward with long-delayed internal disciplinary proceedings against the officers involved if the Justice Department does not announce criminal charges by August 31st.
Officer Daniel Pantaleo, who applied the fatal chokehold, continues to work for the New York Police Department on paid desk duty, has received multiple raises since Eric Garner's death. On Tuesday, Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, called for justice at a news conference on the steps of City Hall with elected officials and activists.
It's been 4 years, and my family has not seen any responsibility taken by the Blasio administration for the police's misconduct. All those officers that day, they need to stand accountable for what they did to my son. They killed him. He was unarmed. My son was doing nothing but trying to help the community, and they took his life. This has to stop. In the black and brown community, they have to treat us with dignity as they do in other communities. And until this happens, we're not going to stop.
That's Eric Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, who's joining us in studio, organizing an event this weekend to bring together mothers from around the country whose loved ones were killed by police. She's got a forthcoming memoir, This Stops Today. Eric Garner's mother seeks justice after losing her son. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Gwen Carr. So the New York Police Department announced that if the Justice Department doesn't come down with findings or investigation results by the end of August, they will start these internal proceedings against officers involved with your son's death. Talk about your response. They're talking both about Daniel Pantaleo as well as the supervisor on the scene, who was Kizzy Adonis, one of the first supervisors at the scene.
Yes. They're talking about the two of them, but they're not talking about the other 4 officers that was involved. And what I would like to see is that all of the officers that was involved in my son's death that day be accountable and transparent, and that they get fired from the force, because they're the ones that is responsible for my son's death. And there were other officers who were on the side that no one ever saw, that they filed false reports before anyone saw the video. So they should stand accountable also.
And I'm wondering, we were just discussing with Reverend Jackson the recent killing in Chicago and the continued incidents that we're having across the country of police shooting unarmed African Americans or folks who are not posing any immediate threat to them. I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Yes, it's like an epidemic. It keeps happening over and over again. And it's always in our communities. Not saying that people don't get killed in other communities, but it's a vast amount. The vast majority gets killed in the African American and the black and brown communities. And this is what we need to stop. And the only way it's going to stop if we step up and we speak about it and we be about it.
So what has caused the New York Police Department to make this statement right now? Have you been communicating with Mayor de Blasio that they are saying they will bring some kind of disciplinary hearings? What will those disciplinary hearings be?
No, I haven't been communicating with the mayor. What has happened, it seems so ironic that they would announce on the eve of my son's anniversary that they're going to move forward, when in fact they could have moved forward way before now, because the DOJ gave them the go-ahead back in April, that they didn't have to wait for them to go forward with their charges. So they could have done this. So why not in May, June, or early July?
And the whole issue of how long it's taken the Justice Department to conduct an investigation?
4 years. Why take so long? I mean, it's like political procrastination. That's what it is, because it shouldn't take this long. The whole world seen what happened to my son. It was on video. So what else do they need? I mean, all I'm seeking is justice, closure for my son. There's no justice for my son because he's gone. But for us, the family, we need closure.
We don't want to show the image over and over of your son being killed, but we're showing it right now because you see how many officers are involved in this. First, you have the Pantaleo and other officers bringing him down, and then more join in this as they're holding him down as he is saying, "I can't breathe."
And they were paying him no attention at all when he's saying, "I can't breathe."
What is your explanation? What does the city and the Justice Department tell you about why these officers aren't held accountable?
Because this is what they do. And, if the higher-ups don't hold them accountable, they feel like it's okay for them to do this, and which is not. We are all American citizens, and we all deserve the same type of treatment. And they come into the African-American neighborhoods, and they just brutalize, they terrorize, they kill us. And most of the time, we're unarmed. My son was breaking up a fight that day. He was trying to help someone. And they came and targeted him, and they took him down, and they killed him for no apparent reason.
And the explanation of the Justice Department why they have not moved on this in 4 years?
They're saying that they are turning over every stone, that they are making sure before they make a decision. How many stones are there? How many pebbles of sand do they have to turn over?
We want to thank you for being with us. Gwen Carr, mother of Eric Garner, African-American father, Staten Island resident, killed by police 4 years ago this week as they took him down, pinning him in a fatal chokehold as he gasped, "I can't breathe," 11 times. Grandmother of Erica Garner, who also fought so hard for justice for her father's death. And that does it for our show. We have job openings, full-time news producer position here in New York. Please go to democracynow.org to apply immediately. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gaddis-Diener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masood, Tarina Nadura, Nat Needham. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.